This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today, we are sharing an interview we recorded recently. It's the latest in our occasional series, Vermont Edition at Home. Our team packs up our gear and heads to someone's house where we record an interview in their favorite space.
Hi! Hello. I'm so sorry I'm late.
You're not late.
Today, Rosemary Gladstar. She's known as the godmother of American herbalism. She's written a dozen influential books on the power of herbs, founded herb conferences and symposia, and established a botanical sanctuary and herbalism teaching center in central Vermont. She also co-founded Traditional Medicinals Tea. You might have a box of one of their classic teas on your shelf right now. Cup of Smooth Move, anyone? Rosemary is one of those people who can point to a lowly-looking weed growing out of the sidewalk and tell you 5 different ways to cook with it or cure an ailment. We met Rosemary at her home in Milton on the shores of Lake Champlain. First, she brought us downstairs to her herb cellar, which is lined with little glass bottles of dried herbs and tinctures.
Is it fun? Yeah. I have all my tinctures. These are all the tinctures that I make down here. Yeah.
Then she made us some tea, and we sat down in big, comfy chairs overlooking the lake.
I have no idea what you're going to ask me. We just chat.
I don't know either.
Okay.
We'll see.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And with that, here is Rosemary Gladstar at home. You live in such a visually stunning spot, and right now we're in your kitchen, living room area, in 2 very comfy chairs, looking out the window. You, though, spent many, many years not here in Milton, but in central Vermont. Could you tell us about this really unique space that you helped craft in Vermont?
I'd be so happy to. Yeah, so I spent most of my life here. I moved here about almost 40 years ago. So most of the time I've been living at this place we call Sage Mountain, which is outside the little town of Orange. Most people in Vermont don't even know where it is. It's sort of a spot on the map. It's a wonderful community. And we had a herbal retreat center there and botanical sanctuary. It was up in the mountains. It was 600 acres of just beautiful wilderness that abutted 25,000 acres. So it was a large swath of wilderness. It really informed my work because where I had begun my practice of herbalism, which was in Northern California, where I was born and raised, I mostly did community work. I ran an herb store and taught an herb school, etc. But when I moved to Vermont and landed on this mountain in the midst of this wilderness, and really began to focus my attention on the plants growing in the wilderness, and it really, I still taught and I still did community work and worked a lot one-on-one with people, but my work really began to focus more on the herbs and the habitat they lived in and also the health of these habitats. So
I read somewhere that when you were describing your childhood, and you said that at some point plants started speaking to you. You started to hear their call. What did that sound like? What conversations?
Well, definitely not English.
Yeah.
I'd say plants speak in many languages, usually not, like a human language. They have their own way of communicating. And anytime anybody works with plants for any length of time, whether it's gardening or they're working in a nursery, they generally hear the plants. You know when your plants are hungry, when they're thirsty, when they get enough light. They communicate to us in a more sensory way. And so as a young child growing up in a very plant-rich environment, Sonoma County is just lush with all kinds of plants that grow there. I could feel them speaking to me really, and how that related to me was like I'd be out running in the fields like all children, playing in nature, and I would just make little nests and beds in the plants and lay in them and just want to be a reflection of nature, so that when people looked at me, they also saw nature, I just felt that the plants were always in some way or another communicating. Sometimes even so much like when I was older and doing a lot of backpacking in the Pacific Northwest, it was like I just would know which plants to harvest. I mean, I would look them up, of course, and research, but, I remember hiking through the woods and I'd actually, stop. I'd feel something tugging and I'd turn around and there would be, an incredible bunch of edible plants or edible mushrooms, and so, yeah, I look at that as a communication, not necessarily like you and I sitting here having this conversation, but a response from nature, nature communicating with me and my being able to hear it in a way that I responded. I would turn around and look or, look up to see what was growing on the trees. And there would always be some gift there.
Did your parents, your family have a similar relationship to nature to the one that you're describing? Or were you a bit of a unique bird?
Well, I was probably a little bit of an odd duck in our family. But I had a really incredible teacher when I was growing up. So my grandmother on my mother's side, who was Armenian, she was very, very knowledgeable about the plants. And I always like to point out that it wasn't that she called herself an herbalist, but like many of our elder grandparents, she was incredibly familiar with plants. And her more so than most because she was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. And she used to tell us when we were children growing up that it was really her knowledge of her belief in God, because she was incredibly deeply spiritual and religious, and her knowledge of the plants, because she knew the plants really well that saved their lives, because she knew which plants that they could eat and not eat. So, yeah, and that struck with me really deeply as a child. I hear her voice now. And when we were children, I wasn't signaled out, by the way, as being anybody special, but she would I have 5 siblings, and she would take us all into the garden to help her weed. And then she had a gathering basket, and a lot of those weeds would go into the gathering basket and come into the house. So she was teaching us when we were small which plants we could eat and which plants they used for poultices and medicine. And so all of us grew up with that, but I definitely had an affinity for it. It's like, even by the 7th and 8th grade, my plants in junior high school were wild plants of Sonoma County, Native American uses of wild plants of Sonoma County. So it was seeded in me very deeply as a young child. I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Some children who had that affinity for plants and the natural world might begin to feel magnetized towards studying science, or going down that more, in a way, traditional route. But you went in a different direction. Was there a moment where, I don't know, like the traditional schooling that you were a part of started to feel like it wasn't a fit?
Well, I would say that almost all children have that natural affinity with nature. Even if you don't grow up close to nature, you're growing up in New York City, children find parks and they find sticks and plants and weeds. So it's a common language that almost everybody speaks around the world, by the way. As I've traveled around the world, these stories of children and their connection to plants are almost universal. So we won't say for everybody, but for a large number of people, it's one of the things I think that unites us as humanity is our connection to the plants. And I'm not sure if there was ever a time I ever thought of doing anything else. Like, if there was, I can't remember. I opened up my first herb school, herb store when I was in my early 20s. I was like 21 or 22. It was just a calling. And and also I want to say that I was never discouraged. I really wasn't encouraged by my parents, but never discouraged. They never tried to redirect me in any other way. And also, I was growing up in the 1960s and 1970s in Sonoma County, right north of San Francisco. So I was right in the heart of the hippie movement. And it was, for me, hippies were all about the back to the land movement. So I grew up on the back to the land and on a farm, a small dairy farm. But for me, going back to the land meant going further into the wilderness, right? And when I went there, I just met all these like old people that lived in the woods, and some of them had lived there forever, and some had just, had left society and were going out to homestead. And they were all so generous with sharing with me. So from a very young age, I feel like I was self-directed, but I was also helped along that path by people. Some people, I can't even remember their names, but by these people who just seemed to know that I had a mission and helped me along that path.
I know you had one experience in particular where you quite literally went back to the land. You and a girlfriend and your young son
Yeah.
went on what sounds like an incredible 3-month horseback riding adventure where you ate only what you found, an occasional jug of peanut butter from a store. But can you tell me about this? I have a 4-year-old who would, if I took her away from chicken nuggets for a week, would lose her mind. So.
No, it was one of the really great wild experiences of my life. I also want to say it's the only time in my entire life my mother was ever really angry at me.
Oh, really?
Like I was riding out of the horse. I had boarded the horses in my mom and dad's pasture in Sonoma County while I worked to get, money to buy the saddles and the saddle blankets and all of that stuff, right? So I was working really hard that summer to kind of equip the horses. And I was riding out of her backyard with he was not even quite 3 years old, tied around my waist. My little son, Jason. And my mother is yelling at me, "You can kill yourself, but don't kill my grandson."
Spoken like a true grandma.
Yeah, really spoken like a true grandmother. It took me years. I'm looking at her going, is she nuts? Because, when you're young like that, there's nothing in the world that could possibly go wrong. Right? Yeah. But when I look back, I think, oh God, what my mother knew and I didn't. But yeah, it was an amazing trip. It was my young friend Evie, and we had 2 horses. And we rode for 3.5 months. We left from Sebastopol, my parents' yard, and we rode up to the Trinity Alps in Northern California. We had food for the horses, and we would resupply the horses. We'd come across sheep farmers up in the mountains or whatever, and they would grain the horses for us and feed the horses. But Evie and I and my son wildcrafted, and then occasionally we'd stop at this one town called Xenia, California, which is way up in the mountains, and it had one store and these 2 old people, an old man and an old woman who lived on opposite sides of the street. We would pull in, ride in on our horses and buy peanut butter. We were craving peanut butter and mayonnaise because it was the fats and oils, right? Everything else, I've never been so healthy in my whole life. Wild food and peanut butter and mayonnaise. We didn't eat peanut butter and mayonnaise often, but, I remember that, we'd get celery sticks or whatever vegetable they would have at the shop, and we would just sit there and eat it like that. But everything else we would collect along the path as we rode.
Wow. What an incredible adventure.
It was an incredible adventure, yeah.
So then you went on to open this store.
Yeah, when I came back from that trip, I in this very mature, older voice, I said to myself, I've been living a period of grace. Now I'm laughing because I was 22, but it's now I need to give back to our society. And so, I opened an herb store, which seems kind of presumptuous because I really hardly knew anything. But what I did know was more than what other people did. I knew a little bit more than other people, but I was so young, I couldn't have packed in a lot at that point, but I just felt a need to want to serve and to give back. And that was the way I knew how to do it, right? So I opened it in, as I said, 1972 in a little town called Guerneville. And then later we moved it to the little town I grew up in, Sebastopol, California, where it's still there on the main street.
Wow. Did you feel as though you were doing something revolutionary or out of the ordinary by opening this herb store? Because looking back now, especially if you were from a different part of the country than you are, that this would have been a really revolutionary moment.
Yeah, no, it didn't feel revolutionary. It just felt like what needed to get done, I felt like, there was those 20 years there maybe 15 when I opened the herb store were these incredibly dynamic, creative years where there was a lot of creativity that was going on, not just with myself, but with the whole community. At that time, the organic health, the organic food movement was starting, the, homesteading again was starting, the natural rearing of animals was starting. And I'm not sure that we who were in that movement were looking at it going, this is revolutionary. It was more, I think, that it needed to happen and there was nobody doing it, so you just did it, so yeah. And it was always fun too. That made it really easy.
That's important. When did you leave California?
Yeah, I left it was around 1987, actually. And when I moved to Vermont, I'd never been here before. I just packed up my boxes. Well, I gave away almost everything. And I packed up 16 like UPS boxes, which were mostly my books, a few dishes and some clothes, and shipped them to this place I'd never seen.
Why?
Well, I hate to really admit. I mean, I think the real reason was I needed change. I was ready for change. And I sort of like when I'm ready for change, it always seems to happen kind of abruptly like that. I was ready for change. I wanted something different. I'd always been called to Vermont. I had read the Helen and Scott Nearing books, Back to the Land and Living the Good Life and stuff. They were very revolutionary during that time, right? And so I'd always felt a call to come to Vermont, but I had met a man, and so I came out here. So love was a very big part of the call. I wished I could say it was anything but that was it. So
around this time, soon after you moved to Vermont, you co-founded the New England Women's Herbal Conference.
Yes.
And your first book was also focused on women's health
Yes.
and healing. It came out in 1993. And I mean, I feel it's well documented now, anecdotally and in scientific research, that women's health issues and women's pain often go unacknowledged to this day and are less studied than medical issues that only affect men. And I'm wondering why in the 80s and 90s, I mean, you seem to be early to figure this out and to realize that maybe there were things that Western medicine wasn't doing to help women.
Well, I saw it every day in my herb store. I ran my herb store for almost 18 years in that small community that I lived in. And I had been customers for certain, but so many women came in with really serious health problems. Many of those women had been to the doctors and, really tried everything that was offered, and nothing was working for them. And I saw over and over and over again for all those years how these herbs really helped. They didn't always cure, often they did, but not always, but how they really helped women recover from their trauma or illnesses. And at that time, there weren't very many books addressing. There was a couple books for women's health, and some from medical perspectives, some from natural perspectives, but none of them were really addressing some of the more serious health problems that I had seen these herbs helpful for. And so that's why I wrote that book. It was the first book I wrote, and it was based on the experiences, I talk a lot about that in the book, of the women that I had served in Sonoma County, many of the women who would come into the herb store. So, and then when I started women's herbal conferences out in California back in the 1970s, actually, they were huge and they're still ongoing. Actually, they have them every year up in Northern California. And when I came out to New England, a really dear friend of mine, a woman named Gail Ulrich, who was the founder of a beautiful little school called Blazing Star Herb School, she had started a women's herbal conference. And she was doing it in her backyard in her little herbal retreat center. So it was small, but it was beautiful. And I had gone to it a couple of times, and I said to her, if you'd like to make this more inclusive and invite a lot more women, I'm very happy to help you. And so Gail and I partnered up. It was like, they went on for 33 years. So it'd be going back 33 years ago. We partnered up and we hosted these beautiful big conferences. We ran at big retreats. They were my favorite events. I mean, we had up to 800 women come every year. And some of the women came every single year. So we saw these little babies, were a year old, and they were like 33 years old by the time we finished doing the conferences. But, oh my God, sitting in a circle with 800 women all drumming and singing and dancing together. It was heart-throbbing, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you're known now as the godmother of American herbalism, so it sounds like you have lots of god babies out there in the world.
I do have a lot of god babies. It's a funny title. I always laugh and say, thank goodness they gave me that title. They could have given me one so much worse. So I'm satisfied with that one.
It's a pretty nice one. have to take a quick break, but when we come back, Rosemary Gladstar will tell us why every plant has a use. More Vermont Edition at Home is coming up. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from Vital, Vermont information technology leaders. Did you know that 98.9% of Vermonters share health data with their providers through the nonprofit Vital to support better care? Learn more at vitl.net/sharing.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we are listening to the latest installment in our ongoing series, Vermont Edition at Home. In this series, we have intimate conversations in the homes of noteworthy people in our region. Today's is with the herbalist, author, and educator Rosemary Gladstar. Over the past 50 years, she's helped shape modern herbal medicine in the U.S. She's the author of a dozen books and the co-founder of the Sage Mountain Herbal Retreat Center in Orange, Vermont. We spoke to her at her home in Milton on the shores of Lake Champlain. You mentioned COVID, and that made me think of the little tour you were giving us in your herb room downstairs.
Yes.
And I saw there was a whole shelf of things dedicated to COVID.
Yeah.
And I imagine through your years there have been different times, different periods where people were really focused on needing help with one certain thing or another. I'm wondering if there are other ones that come to mind.
Well,
for you.
Lyme disease is also another thing. It's especially in our area, New England, it's quite traumatic for people, and we have so many ticks. And so that's another one that I always like to be prepared for, right? And it's not, I want to be clear, it's not like I think that modern medicine doesn't have a place in these. I absolutely do, I think, but also that herbs can be such a good preventative and also times work so well that you don't need to do stronger medicine. So, and that's one of the really beautiful places. Herbalism serves as such a wonderful system of healing for almost all of our home health needs. We don't really necessarily need to run to the pharmacy for all the colds and headaches and something, sometimes even something like getting a tick bite. We have the ability to be able to fight that. And if we get the rash and we start to get flu symptoms and stuff, then yes, that would be a really good idea to go to a Lyme savvy doctor who could possibly, do tests and then if necessary, give penicillin or antibiotics. But it's not always necessary to do that, and that's one of the things I think it's one of the side effects of modern medicine is it's trained people not to be responsible for self-health, self-care. And where there's, I was raised in a family in part because we were farmers, we were poor, and in part because we had a grandmother who was very knowledgeable about home remedies. But I had 5 brothers and sisters growing up on a farm. And really, almost every single health issue that we had in our family, my family dealt with home remedies. I think in my whole childhood, there was only 2 times we went to the doctors. Once was when my older sister fell off the horse and broke her hip, obviously a medical situation. And the other was when my baby sister, I'm laughing because she survived, right? But when my younger sister got into the rat poison and ate rat poison. So,
Oh, no.
I know. She's still healthy and fine and everything. But everything else the family dealt with, with home remedies. So, yeah. And that's really how a lot of the world still functions. And it's great to have a medical system that we can rely on for any kind of emergency situations or even situations where we don't feel like we have the ability. But to be trained in knowing how to take care of yourself is pretty awesome.
Yeah. So for those of us who don't know very much about herbalism, I wonder if you could help us just define the word herb, because I think you might use it differently than how maybe a grocery store manager might, who is putting, just a couple plants in one section and
Oregano
the rest of them.
Yeah. So most herbalists that I know define the term herb to mean any plant that's useful to people. And really, I would say in my definition, that's all plants, even plants that we think of as not edible. They have a use. They can be helpful for the environment. They can be restoring nitrogen to the soil, or like a plant like poison ivy or poison oak. which people don't like very much. I don't particularly love them, but I respect them. They're very protective to the environment. Like if you get poison oak or poison ivy, here in New England we have poison ivy, you don't go walking in the woods without being very thoughtful. You're always watching, which is what I think poison ivy is asking us to do. Be mindful and watch and careful where you step, and be mindful that you've entered sacred territory, that you're not the boss here. So every one of these plants has a use. So the definition of herb for herbalists is plants that are useful. And as I said, I broaden that to say, because to me, all plants have a value and a use on this planet. And there's a botanical definition too of an herb, which is, a non-woody plant that dies back. I think part of the definition, it dies back every year, but that definition definitely is just botanical. It is not the way that herbalists look at herbs, because so many of the woody plants, like including tree species, are very edible or very medicinal, very healing. For instance, linden and oak and elder.
Yeah. When you're describing your work and this community that you've built, it's sustained you and your family. You also know a lot, not just about herbalism, but also about founding a company and what it takes to do that. So you had some personal experience on that end of things too, with the traditional medicinal tea company that you co-founded. And I'm sure many of our listeners would recognize the boxes of these teas if they shop at their local co-op or natural food store. They're everywhere. But that was a company you founded in the
1974.
1974. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's 50 years. But yeah, sometimes people call me an entrepreneur and I just laugh. Really, I'm the worst business person. I don't like business when it gets big. And almost always when any of the businesses I started, or even like the nonprofits, when they start to get bigger than I am, I usually hand them on to more competent people. But I am very proud of that company. I co-founded it. I was mostly did all the formulations, right? All of the early 13 formulations, which are still their best sellers, which I'm so proud of.
Like what?
Smooth Move Tea.
Yes.
Gypsy Cold Care. Easy Now Nervine, which is now Cup of Calm. Throat Coat.
Oh, Throat Coat. A modern classic. We have it at our house.
Yeah, those were all my original formulas back when I was working at my herb store. And really what it was is I had created these formulas for my community. And I had a good friend who wanted to package them into little tea bags, and so not tea bags, just bulk. So the first rendition of Traditionals was these beautiful little brown paper bags with these great labels, which we still have copies of, by the way. And then, I just sold them in my herb store. And then my partner at that time was a really savvy businessman, and he was an astrologer. And every year he would do these really beautiful calendars that he would silkscreen with all these astrological signs and stuff. And he'd put it, this was back in the 70s, right? Put them in the car and drive up and down the coast and sell them. So he said, well, Rosemary, I'll take some of your teas along. So I said, great. And then he'd call me en route and go, oh my God, we've sold 10 tea bags. 15 of this one and 10 of this one. And I'd have to go up and mix the blends. And it was pretty exciting. And he sold more tea than he sold calendars. So of course, it got him really excited about the teas. So he was very, very excited. The tea company in that first 10 years grew very large, actually. We went from the loft of my store, and then we converted an old chicken house into the first warehouse, and then we rented a big warehouse, and we would go to all these enormous shows, and I was like, I don't really want to do this. I want to just teach herbalism and be a little herbalist working in my herb store. And then I started another business called Country Comfort, and that's still sold. It's salves and baby products. And it was, it was, as I said, those were such creative years. I had so much fun. I just pop out ideas. And then I always say, I'm a really good formulator of herbs and also of people. And so I've never, ever done anything on my own. It was always just bringing in the right people who were always so helpful. And they would, really help me with my ideas. And the ideas would just pop and grow. So it was fun.
Yeah. I know that there have been some tensions in the past between the herbalism community and those pressures of our modern market. And I'm thinking specifically here of the Fire Cider debate of the past 10 or 15 years. But I was wondering if you might be able to talk us through what exactly happened
with
there.
With Fire Cider, it's very interesting. So Fire Cider is a formula. It's a recipe. People have been making similar recipes forever. You know, they go you can go back hundreds of years, and people mix honey and vinegar and herbs together. This particular recipe that we titled Fire Cider was created at the Herb School Kitchen in California around 1981. We created a formula that was made with ginger and garlic and horseradish, cayenne pepper, in a vinegar solution. So it'd be like a tonic. And then a young couple actually discovered this recipe and were making it, and they started selling it at the local farmer's market, and people bought it and thought it was really great, and they got all excited. And so they decided they were going to trademark the name. And then they sent a very nice letter to several companies saying that, we're so sorry, but you can't sell this. We've trademarked, this is our recipe. Well, herbalists got really outraged about this. I have to say, I
guess it takes a lot to outrage an herbalist.
It takes a lot, but taking their formulas away or saying that they were trademarking something that had been around for decades,
that'll do it.
And they felt like was theirs. And a group of herbalists decided, with me supporting, of course, that they were going to fight this. And it wasn't just because it was about Fire Cider. It was just not going to be worth it if it was about one name. But it was the idea that if they were allowed to trademark this, then all of the other commonly shared recipes, some which have been shared for hundreds of years, could then be trademarked by big companies, right? Or small companies, it didn't really matter. And so, it was a 7-year battle. We actually took it to federal court, and we won.
Well, I've seen the evidence of your formulations today. I'm down to the dregs of this drink. Can you describe what you put in here for if listeners have had to listen to me sip throughout this interview?
Well, we were talking about coffee, and I was being asked if I drank coffee, and I said, well, I love coffee, but I don't drink it much because it overstimulates me, right? The caffeine just isn't good for my type. And so, but I love the taste of a good latte, so I do a dandy blend. And it's a mixture of dandelion and chicory and barley. It's very grainy and just delicious flavoring. And I love lattes, so I have a little frother and I froth my milk. Sometimes I add like medicinal mushrooms to it or some medicinal blends to the dandy blend. But yours, I just did the dandy blend, and then I added that frothed milk, and then I had a little shaker of cardamom and cinnamon and allspice, sprinkled that over, and then a little of Vermont maple syrup that's from Sage Mountain from my retreat center.
Oh, wow.
The retreat center I used to run. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you still feel like you are closely connected to Sage Mountain? Do you visit?
Even I have this beautiful home on the lake. I really always think of my home as Sage Mountain, the wild mountain home. With the beautiful herb gardens and the wilderness all around me. And the moose used to come walking through the gardens, and the black bear, really, I'm not kidding you, like we had black bear just walk right across our lawn, and take our bird feeders down. And yeah, I love that. And I'm so proud of it because it's continued to do the work. The young woman who purchased it from us, Emily Ruff, is a really renowned herbalist, and she and her partner are very committed to wilderness preservation and wildlife restoration, and then, of course, the plant restoration. So, yeah.
As we sit here on the lake, it feels very far away from the pressures of modern society. And yet, I noticed that you have 200,000 Instagram followers. How do you feel about social media?
Well, I'm not on it, honestly. So I don't have a Facebook. I mean, I have those, but they're run by my team. Mm-hmm. So I don't have I never even go on them, honestly.
You're very popular there.
Yeah, I stay off of it on purpose, actually, because, I'm grateful for having such a great team, and I'm so grateful that people are interested in plants and herbalism. But I don't think it's good to be on that kind of stuff, right? And I'm busy gardening and trying to do my herb work and still trying to teach and educate people. So I don't want to be distracted by all that energy. So I purposely try to avoid it.
Yeah.
So I know it sounds a little crazy, but
No, not at all.
it's like my goal actually is I have one more book in me. So I'm in the process of rewriting my home study course, and then I have this novel that's been gestating in me since I was in my 40s. It's called Chili Verde and the Garlic Queens, a story of love, passion, and herbs. And so I want to finish that book. I want to start that book, actually, and write it. And then I want to close the computer and shut down my phone and then just live like how I used to live. Which was not, I like being connected, but it's way too connected. So I'd much rather be connected to the earth under my feet and the sky above me and the plants. And it's hard to do that in this world that we live in. So, that's my goal. I have to get to it really fast, though, because life is galloping by.
We have to take one more quick break. In just a moment, though, we'll head outside to Rosemary Gladstar's herb garden, where she gives us a tour of some of her favorite medicinal plants. More Vermont Edition at home coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we are listening to the latest installment in our ongoing series, Vermont Edition at Home. In this series, we have intimate conversations in the homes of noteworthy people in our region. Today's conversation is with the internationally renowned herbalist Rosemary Gladstar of Milton. She's the co-founder of the Sage Mountain Herbal Retreat Center in Orange and the author of many, many books on herbalism. After our conversation in her living room, we headed outside. Rosemary was really excited to show me her herb garden. When we recorded this, it was late spring, early summer, right after a rainstorm, and the plants were looking lush. Some had bright, beautiful flowers on them, others were being frequented by happy little bees, and others looked, to the untrained eye, I'll admit it, like weeds. Rosemary had something positive to say about every single one of them.
I have several mints planted around, and the mints are all both edible and medicinal, right? We use them in teas. They're all uplifting. This is one of my favorite. That's the spearmint. But this is the one I wanted to show you. This is a wild plant, and it's called celandine. It's extremely bitter, so I'm not going to let you taste this one. But what if you take the leaf? You see
is it yellow?
Yes. And it is a wild plant. It belongs to the poppy family. And so this is the plant that has a long history of being used for warts. It's applied topically, and this herb really does work.
Okay, I'll come back next time.
This herb, next one you have time, you have a wart on your toe, but
That's magical looking though.
Yeah.
The yellow in there,
Yes.
it's like a dye almost.
so all the poppy family has a white milky latex, and that or a colored latex, and that's what was collected and used as opium substitutes, right? And then we have echinacea growing here, which is probably one of our most well-known herbs. It's not in flower yet, purple cone flower. This one is Echinacea purpurea, but there's many varieties that are used medicinally, and many, many types that people grow. And it's the entire plant is useful. The root, the leaves, and the flowers are all used in medicine, and they're powerful antimicrobials, antibacterial, and antiviral. Hundreds of studies have been done on echinacea. So I always call it the ambassador plant, right? Because it was like the first plant in America, like in more modern times, it was in the 1980s, that people started using it because they had all this study and research, and it was also familiar to them. A lot of people were growing it, and it worked when they used it, right? For colds and flus. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff growing in here. This little called gill over the ground. I love this little plant. This little beautiful little ground cover that everybody works really hard to pull out of their yard. Yeah, that's another very medicinal plant. I have more over here. Oh, and sage. All these plants. So this is sage, which is cultivated here. I plant the sage. But it's also, so people, this is a really good example of an herb that we consider culinary, right? Everybody uses sage. They don't use it as often as they should. It's usually brought out around Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays and stuff. But it's one of the most medicinal plants that we have for sore throats and colds, and as an antiviral for keeping infections away. And it makes a delicious tea. In fact, in the early pioneer days when England was not allowing green tea to come in or black tea to come into the States, this is the tea that everybody was drinking. And then the early pioneers were shipping massive amounts of sage to China because they were drinking the sage tea, because it's a very delicious, pungent, kind of grounding tea. It's also, out of curiosity, it's a tea that I oftentimes recommend for women when they're going through menopause and they feel kind of ungrounded and unsure of themselves, because sage grounds us. It makes us feel really solid in ourselves. So it's a very important herb in so many ways. And then this is another one. Am I talking too much?
No, this is wonderful.
I know, once I start talking about plants, it's
You're in your happy place.
I am in my happy place, for certain. So then I have these two mullins here, and they're related to our common mullein, which we saw over there, our weedy mullein, which is one of my very, very favorite plants, as they all are.
Yeah.
But I planted these Greek mullins because they're so beautiful looking. Like they look exactly like our common weedy mullein. They get multi-headed though, and they have several stalks on them, all bursting out with these yellow flowers. So this is not an edible plant because you can't really just cook it and eat it, but it's definitely one of our most medicinal weeds, and it's used for all kinds of bronchial issues. So like if you have really bad bronchial congestion or lingering colds that don't go away or lingering coughs, we use the leaves of this. And then the flowers have a long history. They're little beautiful yellow flowers. They have a long history of being used for ear infections.
Oh.
For ear infections that are due to congestion, not, like water in the ear, like swimmer's ear.
Right.
So, yeah, there's that. And then this is a Russian sage.
I love seeing the bumblebees this time of year. They just look like orgasmically happy for lolling around on the plants.
They are, and they're native pollinators, where our beautiful honeybees are not the native pollinators, but we love them anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then oregano, another mullein. This is a vervain, blue vervain, which we do have wild vervains growing in Vermont, in New England. But this is a cultivated variety I put in. And this one is definitely the aerial part, so that's above ground part, is definitely used in medicine.
Yeah.
And then this is one of my very favorite plants. I say that all the time.
Yes.
I'm noticing. One of my favorite plants, but I mean it with all my heart, is rhodiola. And I just planted these. This is a plant, actually it's native to New England, but of course it's endangered in New England. It's found only growing high up in the mountains. And then it's native to like Mongolia and the Himalayas. And it's a plant that's very highly regarded as an adaptogenic herb. An herb that helps our bodies and our emotions adjust to the stresses of modern day life.
Yeah.
Something we could all use, right?
Yeah. You're telling me.
And then this is a native plant called black cohosh, which is native only to the northeastern and southeastern United States, not found growing anywhere else in the world. But in Europe, its black cohosh root is the #1 selling medicine, including drugs or anything, for menopausal women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's more, and all of it was coming from the United States, all shipped out of the United States from wild sources until fairly recently. Yeah, so huge. This is on the United Plant Savers at risk list because it's been so severely over-harvested.
Huh.
Yeah. Oh, and I do want to show you one other neat little wild patch that
We walked about 50 yards away from the garden to what seemed to me like an unkempt patch of weeds between a handful of small trees. It was the kind of thing you'd take your weed whacker to because your lawnmower wouldn't fit between the trees. But to Rosemary, this little patch of green contained multitudes.
All right, what's hidden back here?
Oh yeah, so we have everything. We have everything that you could possibly need to be happy is right here. It's all here. So we have nettles, which I love. Nettles is my #1 favorite plant of all plants. And I love it because remember that horseback trip I was This is one of the main plants we ate.
Oh, wow.
It's so delicious. Like, you pick the young greens, like when they're like this stage, or a little younger, you could get those too. And you steam them. So you go to your nettle, and it's just the best tasting green. It's got more iron, more calcium, and more protein than, I would say, almost any other green. You go to the Department of Agriculture, there are food charts where they're showing you the vitamin, minerals, calcium, all the plants. These wild herbs have more in them than the cultivated vegetables that we grow. Yeah, so nettle is the comment about nettle that all herbalists make: when in doubt, eat nettle, because you can just use it for so many things. And it's also a very powerful medicinal plant that is used a lot for like reproductive health of men and women. It's also used as for people who get really bad allergies. It's not a curative of symptoms. So like if people try to drink nettle when they have the symptoms, it's not so helpful. But to be used as a preventative, like drinking nettle tea and also using the freeze-dried capsules, really helps people that have bad allergies, seasonal allergies. I make a nettle spanakopita where instead of using spinach, I use nettle. I layer it with feta cheese. I make an egg batter and put it in with the nettle, and then I layer it with feta and then put it in that phyllo dough with lots of rich butter.
Yeah, that sounds delicious.
Oh, it's so good. Well, here's a little dandelion down here. Dandelion being probably our number one most useful weed, and in the United States, it's just a shame because people try to kill it so much, and it's just other parts of the world, like you travel anywhere in Europe, people worship the dandelion. Leaf and root are edible and medicinal. They're bitter. And then we also have in here violets, which I adore. Yeah. Violets are one of my... Oh, see the little violet down there growing, the little beautiful flowers? So, yeah. So these leaves are a little old right now because it's late in the season, but they're very tasty. Just put a tiny bit in your mouth when you like that, and if it's mucilage and sweet tasting, you know it's violet. The other is it has a heart-shaped leaf. It's always growing in early spring. By late summer or midsummer, it's not so much, and you almost always will find it in flower in the spring. And the flowers are white, purple, and yellow.
How do you feel about rosemary, your namesake?
Oh, yeah. Well, I love that herb. So I was not actually named after the plants. I was named after my grandmother's, Rosemary, but I thought it was very fortunate. Yeah, one grandmother's name was Rosemary, but my other was Mary, so they put the two names together. But I always felt very fortunate. But for some reason, I never really fell in love with I liked rosemary, but I think I sort of avoided it because, I don't know. But these last few years, I fallen madly in love with that. I have big rosemary plants, but they're in my greenhouse. We can go look at them if you want. But yeah, I use it for everything. And a lot of times I just drink the tea. Like I've really gotten into drinking like the culinaries, like sage, just as tea, and rosemary. I like the pungency of those herbs, and they're also very grounding. But rosemary I use every single day in my brain tonic formula because as I'm getting older and my memory gets a little bit fuzzy and stuff, I have a very famous formula that's a brain tonic formula that's made with rosemary, gotu kola, and ginkgo. And sometimes I put a little peppermint or sage in it just to kind of activate the formula. But I take that every morning, just about. It's one of the regular things I do. Yeah, I just think it's an amazing herb. So I'm bonding with it at last. But I thought it was funny, like really probably if I was to choose a number one herb, it would be nettle if I had to choose an herb. And rosemary, I kind of just... I knew it's so valuable. It's a really incredible antioxidant. You can use it as a culinary. It's great for all kinds of things, for, medicinally. And then it has a long history of being used for the memory. But yeah, I think because it was my namesake, I felt a little embarrassed about that or something. It's hard to say why. But as I said, I started really just falling into it as I got older, and I'm madly in love with it. So I use it all the time.
Herbalist Rosemary Gladstar from her home in Milton. Thank you so much to Rosemary and your husband Robert for welcoming the Vermont Edition team into your world. And be sure to stay tuned for future interviews in our At Home series, like the one we're working on with the former ace pitcher for the Red Sox and one of the funniest guys I know, Bill Lee. Vermont Edition's managing producer is John Ahrens, and our producers are Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro. Our intern is Callie Canuckseral. Our theme music was composed by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.